Welcome, everyone. If you're into discovering how structured frameworks can completely change the way we evaluate massive, complex projects, well, you're in exactly the right place. In this explainer, we're breaking down a really fascinating document, the Draft Shared KPIs for Built Environment Case Studies. It proposes a massive shift in how we evaluate success, moving away from those incredibly narrow metrics we're all used to, and instead capturing the true long-term value of our infrastructure. Let's get right to it. So think about this for a second. If a building is finished on time and on budget, does that automatically make it a success? I mean, standard project reporting would absolutely say yes. But let's look at it like this. Judging a huge infrastructure project purely by its cost and construction schedule is kind of like judging a car solely by how fast it moved down the assembly line. It completely ignores how the car actually drives on the road. Because let's be real, if the car handles terribly, breaks down all the time, and guzzles fuel, it really doesn't matter how efficiently it was built, right? We need a way to measure how the built environment actually drives. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with beyond time and budget, then cover the 7 shared KPIs. After that, we'll look at the dual measurement approach, explore why do projects succeed, and finally, walk through a real-world case study pall mall. Section 1. Beyond time and budget. Let's start with the core problem here. For decades, the built environment has been evaluated using a really restricted lens. On the left, we have standard project reporting. It focuses heavily on cost, efficiency, and schedule. And look, to be clear, those things absolutely matter. But as the source text points out, they just aren't sufficient anymore. On the right, we have the new systems review objectives. This approach actually steps back to ask the bigger questions. What is the actual service performance? Are we hitting wider outcomes like carbon reduction or biodiversity gain? How well integrated is this asset into the wider system? So we're basically comparing the old way of measuring project outputs with this new systems approach that targets long-term, wider public value. Section 2. The 7 shared KPIs. To actually measure these broader systems objectives across a huge variety of case studies, the review proposes a shared framework. Meet the real heroes of our explainer, the 7 shared KPIs. These were carefully designed for rapid testing, balancing comparability with actual real-world practicality. We begin with the first 2, which are all about establishing a baseline. KPI 1 measures service performance improvement. Basically, how well does the system actually work for the people using and operating it? Is it reliable? Is it safe? KPI 2 measures outcome improvement achieved. This looks at the broader effects the project was meant to influence out in the real world. Think of things like a specific percentage shift in an environmental or social indicator. Together, these 2 make sure we never lose sight of what the system actually does for people. Moving on, we get to the metrics that speak directly to Treasury-facing concerns. KPI 3 is whole life value, and this one is absolutely crucial. It looks at the comparative value of an intervention over its entire lifespan. We're talking economic, social, and environmental value, not just immediate financial returns. Then there's KPI 4, efficiency gain. Do we reduce waste, duplication, or avoidable disruption? Together, these metrics directly evidence whether a systems approach actually delivers better, practical value for money. Then we have KPI 5, which is delivery predictability. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't this just the old standard reporting? Well, yes and no. It does capture those traditional variance metrics, were we on time and on budget, but crucially, it also weighs the soundness of the assumptions and evidence that those original plans were based on. So it's not just about hitting a target, it's about whether that target was actually realistic to begin with. Finally, KPI 6 and 7 zoom all the way out to the macro level. KPI 6, integration improvement, measures how well different organizations, data flows, and assets actually coordinate with each other. And KPI 7, systemic inefficiency reduction, is perhaps the boldest one of the bunch. It attempts to measure if we're successfully lowering structural obstacles, things like rigid regulatory barriers, fragmented investment logic, or policy gaps that literally prevent the wider system from functioning properly. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how grouping these 7 metrics visually prevents metric fatigue. It forms a complete multi-level evaluation. You've got your baseline impact on the ground right there at the start, your economic and delivery rigor in the middle, and your high-level structural health at the top. It's just a beautifully comprehensive way to evaluate a project. Section 3, the dual measurement approach. But here's the real challenge, right? How on earth do you apply these 7 precise KPIs across totally diverse projects, from a small neighborhood park renovation to a massive national railway overhaul, without forcing them all into an artificial one-size-fits-all box? Well, the answer is a highly flexible dual measurement methodology.
For every single KPI we just talked about, the framework requires two complementary scores. First is the native measure. This uses whatever metric makes the most natural sense for that specific case. It could be pounds saved, carbon percentages, days avoided, you name it. This preserves the rich, specific evidence of the project. But alongside that, assessors have to translate that native measure into a common review score, which is a simple 1 to 10 scale using a shared rubric. This is the game changer, because it means we can finally make structured apples-to-apples comparisons across an entire national portfolio.
And this brilliantly illustrates how those 1 to 10 scores are synthesized during high-level discussions. The Italian flag profile. It's a simple shorthand. A score of 7 to 10 gets a green flag, indicating a positive overall judgment. A 4 to 6 gets a white flag, meaning the picture is mixed, partial, or uncertain. And a 1 to 3 gets a red flag, indicating a weak or adverse picture. It makes interpreting dense data sets incredibly intuitive.
Section 4. Why do projects succeed?
So we know how to measure success now, but what actually drives it? The source text identifies 7 specific explanatory conditions. These are basically the conditions that allow systems thinking to thrive. Because here's the thing, you can have a project that theoretically uses a systems approach, but it will absolutely still fail if these enabling factors are missing. You need outcome clarity and systems capability, for sure. But even more critically, you need authorizing leadership to push through stubborn organizational boundaries. You need incentive alignment so contracts actually reward whole system outcomes. And you need adaptive learning so the project can pivot as new evidence emerges. These are the underlying gears actually turning the KPIs. Section 5, Case Study, Pall Mall. To truly understand the power of this framework, we've got to see it in action. So let's apply this dense methodology to a concrete payoff, the incredible Pall Mall project. This was a £33 million deep retrofit of a largely vacant Grade 2 listed building right in the heart of Manchester. The decision to retain the existing structure and retrofit it, rather than knocking it down and starting from scratch, avoided an estimated 7,900 tons of additional carbon. That is 7,900 tons of carbon avoided. It's a staggering figure that enthusiastically demonstrates the immense environmental value of leveraging our existing built assets. Now let's walk through what that dual measurement actually looks like for Pall Mall. Take KPI 3, whole life value. It scored an impressive 9, so a green flag with high confidence, and that was driven by that massive carbon saving and a 100% reported increase in rental value. KPI 4, efficiency gain, scored an 8. Again, green, driven by a circular economy fit-out using reclaimed materials. But then, look at KPI 5, predictability. It only scored a 5, a white flag with low confidence. Why? Well, because while we know the final cost, the publicly available data just didn't provide enough evidence on the original variance and planning assumptions. So, as you can see, it paints a beautifully honest, nuanced picture of the whole project. And the crucial takeaway here is how this comprehensive approach translates for Treasury stakeholders. Instead of just saying, hey, we spent £33 million, the KPI framework actually proves the systemic value. It highlights the benefits gained, like taking a building from an energy performance certificate of G all the way up to an A and getting the office's 90% lent. It maps the costs avoided through those circular fit-outs, and it highlights the risk reduced, mitigating the huge danger of holding a stranded, unusable asset. It proves to the powers that be that systems approaches unlock better long-term productivity and significantly lower fiscal risk. Section 6, Building a Better Baseline. As we wrap up this explainer, let's return to the ultimate ambition of the Built Environment Systems Reveal. It's a bold, necessary attempt to redefine what a successful project truly looks like. And this quote from the framework captures its entire philosophy perfectly. What matters should not be excluded simply because it is harder to measure. Think about that. It is super easy to track whether a project hit an arbitrary deadline. It is much, much harder to measure its long-term service performance, its integration into the city, and the wider social outcomes it achieved. But just because it's complex doesn't mean we can afford to ignore it. Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If standard reporting is no longer enough to capture reality, how will you measure the true value of your next project? Will you just look at the assembly line speed, or will you use a systems approach to evaluate how it actually drives? Think about how these shared KPIs could completely redefine success in your own work. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.